Hello, I'm Martha Hess, a member of the class of 1967 and one of several volunteers who work in the college archives. For the last several months, I've been telling stories about the history of Anderson Hall as the college leaders prepare to renovate this wonderful 142-year-old building. Today, we're going to talk about the Fayerweather Annex. When Anderson was constructed in 1870, it was simply a three-story, rectangular brick building. Everything happened in Anderson Hall. The president's office was there, the library, the chapel, and of course the classrooms for the preparatory school and for the college department. The number of students in 1870-1871 numbered 100. But enrollment increased over the next 20 years, and by 1890-91 the enrollment had jumped to 335, and new classrooms were needed desperately. The board appointed a building committee, and this committee reported back to the board in May of 1892 with 4 points. The first, they had awarded a contract to Mr. W.L. Robinson of Knoxville, Tennessee, to build an annex to Anderson Hall that would be 90 feet long and 40 feet wide. They also instructed him, point number 2, to build large flues in both the annex and the original building, flues that could handle steam heat. These 2 points would be funded from the estate of Daniel Fayerweather of New York City. Point 3, in the coming year, a heating plant would be constructed that would provide steam heat not only to Anderson Hall, but to all of the buildings on campus. Point 4 was a recommendation that in the near future an electric plant would be built to provide electric lights for Anderson Hall and the other buildings. Steam heat and electric lights. But that's a story for another time. The annex was completed in October, and the dedicatory address was given by Dr. E.A. Elmore on October the 21st, 1892. Anderson Hall was still the center of activity on the Maryville College campus. On the first floor, the president's office occupied the large office at the front, and it stayed there until around 1907 when the president's office was moved to the west side of the building. The large recitation area that had been used for nearly 25 years for debating was used for a few more years. The science lab was on the first floor, and an art gallery occupied a room on the first floor. But as the number of staff members increased, this area no longer was a recitation area, and offices were added along the hallway. The first office to be added was that of student aid. Miss Margaret Henry had an office right here, and then her cousin, Miss Clemmy Henry, followed her in the same office. The 2 women ran the student aid office for nearly 50 years. Next door to Miss Henry was Brownie, the beloved college engineer who served the college for 51 years. The business office was across the back of the building, and eventually offices were constructed on this side for the Dean of Women and the Dean of Men. But many changes have occurred on the first floor of Anderson over the years. The second and third floors were dedicated to classrooms. The chapel was on the second floor. The original chapel was 50 feet long and 40 feet wide. When the annex was constructed, 40 additional feet were added to the chapel. Because it was so long and narrow, the rostrum, which had been at the front, was moved to the side. And even though they were at the side, people who sat at the extreme ends had difficulty hearing. This chapel was used until 1906 when it was moved to Voorhees Chapel. After chapel services in the morning, a sliding door was pulled so that the chapel could be used for classrooms on this side and also on that side. The preparatory school occupied the annex, and the college department occupied the original building. When the chapel was moved, classrooms were put in place of this space. But what is very interesting is that hallways were never added between the annex and the original building on either the second floor or the third floor. So faculty and staff who wanted to, and students who wanted to go from the annex to the original building had to walk through a classroom to get there. Hallways were not put in until the 1964-65 school year. So students for nearly 70 years were very confused about how to get around Anderson Hall. Dr. Sarah Brown McNeil, better known as Sally, tells a wonderful story about her first week on the college campus. She had a class in French with Miss Catherine Wilkinson on the second floor in the East Wing. Her sister took her to class the first day, and 2 days later when she went to class, she walked through a door into Anderson Hall that did not give her direct access to Miss Wilkinson's room, and she had to walk through a classroom to get there. The professor let her go through, but made it clear that that was not the appropriate thing to do. So 2 days later, when she returned to class for the third time, Sally walked around to the front of the building and looked up. About that time, a young man with bright red hair leaned out of a second floor window and said, "Stay right there, honey. I'm coming to get you." Sally, like many new freshmen between 1892 and 1965, had to learn the ins and outs of Anderson Hall.